Welcome to the Drift and Ramble podcast. I'm Steve Blizen. Each episode will explore true stories and American legends. From the pages of history and a few stories handed down over the years, we'll look at the people, places, and events that helped shape a nation. Stories of survival, notable frontier men and women, explorers who struck it rich, and the outlaws that stole it from them. There'll be studies of saloon girls, swindlers, banditry, and bad men, profiles of lawmen and American Indians, and the good and evil that existed between them. We'll amble through the past, we'll delve into the folklore of the times, and maybe even uncover a ghost story or two. So, saddle up, or settle in, for the Drift and Ramble podcast. This is Drift and Ramble Rebooted. Episode number 37, Squirrel Tooth Alice. Today's show contains adult themes and is not recommended for young audiences. Mary Elizabeth Haley began life in the Old West in 1855. Born in Belton, Texas, over the first few years of her life, things would go from bad to worse. Mary developed a small gap between her front teeth that would one day earn her a memorable nickname. But the real trouble started when her parents lost their fortune during the Civil War. Then, in 1864, as the war was ending, a band of Comanches raided the family farm in Texas and took the young girl captive. They kept the girl for 3 years, eventually releasing her in exchange for a ransom paid by the family in 1867. But at just 13 years old, she returned home to be considered a marked girl. Humiliated, shunned, and ostracized by society, Libby, as she was known, was left with few options in her young life. People assumed that she had been sexually abused at the hands of her captors, and the townfolk would point, stare, and whisper wherever Libby showed up. Eventually, Libby fell in love with an older man who cared little about her allegedly sullied past. But her father was not so happy about Libby's older suitor. So, he shot the man to death, cementing Libby's reputation as a tainted child. Now, at just 14 years of age, Libby ran away and found herself in Abilene, Kansas, where she took up work as a dance hall girl and a prostitute, and quickly earned her nickname of Squirrel Tooth Alice. Libby, an attractive girl, had that little gap between her front teeth. But that wasn't the only reason she earned the Squirrel Tooth moniker. You see, she had a fondness for taming prairie dogs, which she would parade around town with a collar and leash.
Say, look at that pretty girl over yonder. Is that a prairie dog she has on that leash?
I reckon. I ain't never seen a squirrel on a leash before. Let's go say hello.
Howdy, miss. Sure do like your squirrel. Mind if I pet it?
Henry, that ain't no way to talk to a lady.
Hey, what'd you hit me for? I was being polite. How often do you get a chance to pet it?
You'll have to excuse my friend here. He gets real clumsy around pretty girls. Hey, haven't I seen you at the Abilene saloon? You look just like a dance hall girl I seen there.
Well, I reckon that's me. I work at the saloon. Maybe you boys will stop by and see me later?
Yes, ma'am. Will you have your squirrel with you?
What is it with you and that squirrel?
Well, of course, I like to keep all my little friends around me, but you can pet him now if you like.
Thank you kindly, ma'am. Hey there, little buddy. You sure do make a nice pet.
Oh, look, I think he likes you. Well, you're kind of cute. Well, now, I better get my little friend here back home. Now, you boys come by and see me tonight. My name's Libby. You know where to find me.
Did you hear that? She said I was good looking.
She did not say good looking. She said you were cute. You know, like there might be something wrong with you, or cute like some dainty flower. I think she took pity on you. She was looking right at me the whole time she was talking. Did you see that little space between her front teeth when she smiled? Now that was cute. Said her name was Libby.
How will I ever remember the name Libby? Hey, don't you hit me with that hat again. I see you getting all ready.
By the time that Libby Haley arrived, Abilene, Kansas was already a noteworthy spot on the map of the western frontier. Abilene, positioned at the end of the Chisholm Trail, was known as a cow town, a wild and rowdy frontier town where cowboys, ranchers, merchants, and bandits could all find something of interest. About the same time that Libby was returning from her life with the Comanche, the Kansas Pacific Railroad was completed through Abilene in 1867. With it came opportunity, prosperity, and the untamed spirit that defined the American West. Cattlemen bought and sold livestock, outfitters fueled the cattle drives, and gamblers followed in the wake of the country's success. Saloons, stores, brothels, and gambling houses seemed to spring up overnight. As the town grew, so did its reputation for lawlessness. The first man to become city marshal was a man named Tom Smith, and Smith's first official act as a lawman was to restrict the carrying of firearms within city limits. While Smith was widely respected by the rowdy crowd in Abilene, he was killed during the arrest of a man near the town of Detroit. The new city marshal was none other than Wild Bill Hickok, who at the time was already a living legend. Though Wild Bill was respected as a lawman and maintained a high degree of law and order, he did little to rid the town of its boomtown saloons and gambling houses. In fact, Hickok made his headquarters in the Alamo Saloon, a fitting and convenient location for a marshal's office. Whether Squirrel Tooth Alice and Wild Bill Hickok were friendly isn't widely known, but it's certainly reasonable to assume that they knew each other. A spirited woman, Libby didn't rely on anyone to fight her battles for her. She proved to be equal parts brazen and beauty as she worked her way through the houses of ill repute around Abilene. During the height of its frontier madness, Abilene drew the attention of many famous figures in Western history, and given that Libby eventually settled down with the lesser-known brother of one of these Western legends, it's likely that Squirrel Tooth Alice was a familiar face and name to many of the most famous men in the West. In 1871, the famous British-born gunfighter Ben Thompson and his brother Billy came to Abilene with plans to open a saloon. The Thompson brothers had been action junkies for most of their young lives, and by this time it made perfect sense that they would be drawn to Abilene like moths to flames. Ben Thompson set about to open the famous Bull's Head Saloon with friend and business partner Phil Coe. It was here at the Bull's Head where Wild Bill Hickok, Phil Coe, and John Wesley Hardin would all come to know each other. And in the events that followed, Phil Coe would eventually die by Wild Bill Hickok's famously fast guns. You can listen to episode 35 to learn more about this event. Ben Thompson's younger brother Billy never achieved the level of fame that Ben did in his short life, but that was not to say that Billy was any less dangerous. In fact, little brother Billy had already killed 2 men by the time he arrived in Abilene. While Ben Thompson would one day be regarded as the quintessential gunfighter by fabled lawman-turned-writer Bat Masterson, younger brother Billy shared few of the same qualities. But Billy's skills with a pistol were unquestioned. When Squirrel Tooth Alice first met Billy Thompson, he was 10 years her senior, but she was now a woman of some experience in saloons and brothels. Billy was a handsome, quick-tempered outlaw. Miss Alice was independent, enchanting, and wild. Like kindred spirits, their attraction to each other was strong and immediate.
Billy, I might just shoot those men if they keep teasing my prairie dogs.
Don't worry, Libby. I'll have a chat with them. Excuse me, gentlemen. I have a question. Are you boys planning to pass through town, or will this be your final resting place?
What did you just say, partner?
Ignore him. He's drunk.
Actually, I'm as sober as a judge. But if you're offering,
Hey, that's my whiskey.
perhaps you'd like to try to reclaim it. I haven't had the pleasure of firing my pistol this morning. Perhaps you two gentlemen will change all that? No, I didn't think so. Now, if you'll permit me, the way out of town is in that general direction. I presume you boys will make haste in acquainting yourselves with it.
Now look here, mister. I don't like the way you're talking to me.
Ain't you Billy Thompson? I heard you and your brother might be found in these parts. We don't want no trouble with you, Mr. Thompson. We'll just saddle up and go.
I respect a man with good decision-making skills. Make sure your friend here doesn't get any ideas.
Billy might have been a smooth talker, but he had a reputation for a quick temper and a fast gun. He also developed a pattern of depending on his older brother for help. After killing a soldier in a Texas brothel, Billy fled town, fearing he would hang for the crime. 2 months later, he killed an 18-year-old stable hand who had slapped Billy's horse on the nose when it tried to feed. Thompson became enraged and yelled at the boy, who then challenged Thompson to remove his guns and fight. Thompson did as requested and removed his gun, but only so he could shoot the poor kid twice, killing him instantly. Fleeing again, Billy wound up in Abilene and worked as a cowpunch, working along the Chisholm Trail. After meeting and falling in love with Libby Haley, the couple became inseparable, and she went with him and worked the dance halls and saloons while Billy worked the trail as a hired hand. For 5 years, Billy had remained on the run, but by 1872, the couple was living in Ellsworth, Kansas, where Libby gave birth to her first child. The couple were married soon after.
Do you, William Thompson, hereby take Miss Squirrel Tooth as your lovely bride?
Billy. You can call me Billy Thompson.
Okay then. Billy, do you take Miss Squirrel Tooth Alice?
Actually, my name's Libby. Libby Haley. My given name is Mary Elizabeth Haley.
Oh, for God's sake. Doesn't anyone around here use their real names?
Sir, if we could just move this along, I have a faro game in a few minutes that I'd...
Really, Billy? A faro game on our wedding day?
Technically, we're not married yet, and we may never be if we don't hurry this along.
Billy worked the card tables, while Libby worked the dance halls in the bustling cattle town of Ellsworth. A few months later, older brother Ben came to town. The Thompson brothers became very close to Sheriff Chauncey Whitney, but Whitney had a police officer named John Happy Jack Marco, who the brothers despised. Things would turn sour for Billy on August 15, 1873, when a series of events led he and his brother Ben to become involved in a dispute over money that ultimately resulted in the shooting death of Sheriff Whitney. Though the sheriff himself said it was an accident, just before he succumbed to his wounds, Billy was hustled out of town by his brother, and his reputation as a troubled man was forever cast in stone. A $500 bounty was placed on his head, and Billy would remain a fugitive for several more years.
Oh, Billy, how could you shot your best friend?
It was an accident, Libby. If there was any way to take it back, I would.
But where will we go? What will you do for work? What about the children?
I'm sorry, Libby. I'm afraid we'll just have to find our way.
The couple continued to move about the cattle towns. Libby worked the saloons and dance halls, while Billy drove cattle and gambled their fortunes away. Billy had several brushes with the law, which always resulted in either a narrow escape or asking Brother Ben for assistance. In 1876, Billy was arrested again. Big Brother Ben arranged for some friends to help Billy escape, but this time, his friends were not successful, and Billy was forced to stand trial. Fortunately for Billy, a credible witness came forward with testimony that cleared Billy's name. Ultimately, Billy was acquitted for the shooting death of his friend, Sheriff Chauncey Whitney. However, Billy amassed a plethora of other criminal escapades by this time, and the legal victory was fairly short-lived. Billy, Libby, and their growing family moved to Dodge City for a time. Again, Libby worked the saloons and bustling brothels of Dodge, while Billy, still wanted for his previous crimes, did whatever he could to find work. Here, they befriended the famous townfolk of Dodge like lawman Wyatt Earp and his soiled dove girlfriend, Mattie Blaylock. Though widely regarded as a lawman, Earp was linked to the brothel business throughout most of his career, and there's no doubt the two couples would have made fast friends.
Ma'am, I'd be much obliged if I could pet your squirrel.
Oh, mister, if you got enough money, I might let you pet all kinds of things.
Let me see here. I got $8 and this here gold pocket watch.
Well, now you just bought yourself a personal invite into my bedchamber, mister. Now you'd best hand those trinkets over to me. Now go on upstairs and see Miss Eileen for a nice, warm bath. Smells like a one-man cattle drive in here, and seeing as how you're the only man around me, I believe that might be you. Third door on your right. Oh, I'll be along in just a minute.
Yes, ma'am.
Eventually, the couple moved to Sweetwater, Texas, where they purchased a modest ranch house and a dance hall on Main Street. Here, Libby would ply her craft as a madam, while husband Billy spent little time at home. Though at first Billy didn't bristle at his young bride's occupation, over the years tensions mounted, and the time Billy spent away in the saddle didn't help. Still, each time they reunited, so did their passions, and Libby gave birth to 9 of Billy's children. However, rumors persist that the father of the 9th child was actually a man known simply as Mr. Young. But more about that later. Squirrel Tooth Alice, or Libby Thompson, became accustomed to fending for herself while Billy was away. She was rumored to be handy with a pistol and fearless in the face of men drenched in saddle sweat and whiskey. She managed the tavern and dance hall, performed as the main attraction on stage, but the bulk of the income derived from the business came from the plethora of prostitutes who worked for Libby.
Now, girls, I need you to wear big, bright smiles, low-cut dresses, and never give up any freebies. Is that understood? I'm running a legitimate business with legitimate costs, and I can't afford to let any of my children go hungry.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
And ladies, just one more thing. If my husband Billy shows up, there's a real good chance he will be drunk, tired, running from the law, or just run out of money. So, don't you girls let him talk you into doing anything on the house. You just send him straight over to me.
Eventually, Billy did return to his Sweetwater home, but by then he had the consumption and didn't have much longer to live. Libby couldn't provide adequate care for the man, however, and eventually sent him to be with his family in southern Texas, where Billy passed away in 1897. After 9 children together and 24 years of marriage, Libby didn't waste time in moving on. She took up with a cattle rustler known only as Mr. Young, and rumors began to fly about who the father of Libby's 9th child really was. Despite the talk about town, neither Libby nor her male companions were meant to win any awards for good parenting. Libby had 3 more children, with at least 2 men before retiring as a madam at age 66 in 1921. Her sons became mostly outlaws, and her daughters followed her into prostitution. By the time she retired, Libby spent her days living with various children in places like Palmdale, California, until her final days at the Sunbeam Rest Home in Los Angeles, where she died. Libby Haley Thompson had lived to be 97 years old, and she died in 1953. A well-known portrait of Squirrel Tooth Alice can be found circulating the internet. It features an attractive, well-dressed young woman, possibly in her late 20s or early 30s, posing for the camera in a flowered dress. Sitting in her lap is one of her prized pet prairie dogs. From the picture, one can surmise several things. Libby was indeed proud of her prairie dog pets. She seemed well poised, and the dress she wears indicates that she had access to money. What's not so obvious is the wit, charm, intelligence, and determination required to have earned herself a place in history. Whether remembered as Squirrel Tooth Alice or Libby Thompson, she was never ashamed of who she was or what she did for a living. Prostitution in the Old West didn't carry the stigma that it does today. Houses of ill repute were generally run by women, and the communities they served often benefited in many more ways than the obvious. In truth, there was nothing to be ashamed of. When the census was taken in the area, Libby pondered the question of her occupation and answered it frankly.
Occupation. Well, let's see. One who diddles and squirms in the dark. Well, there. That just about sums it up.
Many resources were utilized in preparing this episode. I'd like to acknowledge the following resources. Wicked Women, Notorious, Mischievous, and Wayward Ladies from the Old West by author Chris Enns. Chris is a New York Times best-selling author with dozens of excellent volumes on Western history. A link to her work can be found in the show notes. CowgirlMagazine.com, AbileneCityHall.com, Kathy Weiser Alexander, and LegendsOfAmerica.com. Wikipedia.org. Want to hear more about Wild Bill or Ben Thompson? Episode 13 is entirely comprised of an article written by Bat Masterson about the qualities of the quintessential gunfighter. In it, Bat talks about his friend Ben Thompson and speaks highly of the man's three primary disciplines of being a successful gunfighter. In episode 35, author, historian, voice actor, producer, and accomplished woodcarver Robert Tinsley takes us back to the days of Wild Bill's law enforcement career, all of which was happening about the same time Squirrel Tooth Alice was in town. Thanks to all the fine actors at Broken Bard Productions for their assistance in making this episode. Appearing in no particular order: Austin Beach, Drew Prophet, Mike Janson. Thanks to Rhiannon McAfee of the excellent Rex Rivetter Private Eye podcast. And of course, a very special thanks to all our listeners. This podcast would not be happening if it wasn't for your support. To learn more about how you can support us, please visit patreon.com/driftandramble. That's patreon.com/driftandramble.
Oh, mister, if you got enough... Oh, mister, if you got enough money, I might let you pet all kind of things.
I feel very mouthy. Does it sound that way to you? Mouthy. It's a term.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
Howdy, miss. Sure do like your squirrel. Mind if I pet it? That's the most messed up line. I gotta try to not make that sound creepy.
The first man to become shitty marshal.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you picked it up, but I could actually hear the TV in the background.
Yeah, the mic's not picking it up.
Sweet.
Actually, my name's Libby. Fucking dog.
Should I say panoply? There's a lot of alliteration in my writing. Have you ever noticed that?
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like your signature.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Next time on Drift and Ramble Rebooted. Aside from cowboy boots and a hat, the most iconic images of the Old West might be the six-gun and stagecoaches. We talked about the six-gun, and we covered wagons. See what I did there? But we really haven't talked about the brave souls who drove these wagons through some of the most dangerous, perilous, bandit-ridden country in the West. Next time, we'll learn about the legendary stagecoach driver that earned a place in history during their lifetime, and then again, after death. It's the story of cockeyed Charlie Parkhurst on the next Drift and Ramble podcast. Until we meet again, I'm Steve Blizzin. Are you a Western writer with a story you'd like us to tell? We're looking for historical and Western fiction stories between 3,000 and 7,000 words. Story rights remain the property of their authors. To learn more, visit driftandramble.com or send an email with the subject Story Idea to driftandramble@gmail.com or contact us through Twitter @driftandramble. Due to the high volume of emails received, we may not respond to your inquiry for several weeks. The contents of this show are for entertainment purposes only. Actor portrayals are not intended to be historically accurate, nor should they be considered as fact. Music used in this podcast consists of original compositions and performances credited to the show's creator and other music licensed specifically for such use. The Drift and Ramble podcast is the exclusive property of Clear Voice Media and Puzzle Audio Productions. No portion of this podcast may be broadcast, modified, or distributed without the express written consent of its owners.